Okay, thanks, Michelle. Hello, everyone. My name is Nigel Caplan. I am the chair of TESOL's Second Language Writing Interest section, and welcome all of you to today's online webinar on supporting ESL graduate writers, whether you're watching us live on what is here in Delaware, a beautiful sunny autumnal afternoon, or if you're watching us on the recording. I'd like to introduce ourselves, the speakers, and set up today's conversation, and we'd love to hear from those of you who are here with us today live as we go through. So I'm delighted to introduce our special guest today. Dr. Michelle Cox is Director of the English Language Support Office at Cornell University. She and I together co-founded the Consortium on Graduate Communication. Michelle is now the immediate past chair, and I'm currently serving as the treasurer of that group. And in my spare time, when I'm not doing either of those things, I'm an associate professor at the University of Delaware's English Language Institute. So, Michelle, are you there?
Yep. Hello, everybody.
Okay, so this is how we're going to do this. We're going to set this up actually as a conversation. I've got a series of questions I'm going to ask that we're going to share our answers on, and we hope that you guys will all chime in with questions and answers to those questions as we go. You can enter your questions in the chat box or unmute yourselves and feel free to speak. So we're talking today about ESL graduate writers, and it's worth maybe just taking a moment to think about why there's even a need to discuss this topic. International graduate students represent 22% of new graduate students on average in the United States, and about 30% of all grad students at the most research-intensive universities in this country. About a quarter of US-trained science and engineering doctoral holders in academia were born outside the country. And in addition to that, we're seeing, certainly in this country, increasing numbers of bilingual students in higher education. And that's having an effect at the doctoral and master's level as well. So the fastest growth in enrollment is among what were previously underrepresented minorities, especially Hispanic, Latino, Latina community, many of whom, or some of whom, are going to be bilingual or continuing to be English learners. And we're seeing this in other countries as well. In Canada, there's been an average growth of international graduate students of almost 7% annually in recent years. In Australia, 1/5 of all university students are international. And the British Council in 2014 projected that graduate mobility, which is students moving anywhere in the world for their master's or doctoral degrees, is going to bring 4% more students every year to the US, Canada, and Australia, and slightly smaller numbers to the UK over the next 10 years. And of course, there are English medium of instruction graduate programs worldwide. Some of you may be in programs like that, where there are where the degrees are taught in English, even though English is not the language of wider communication. Chris Tardy and Erin Wittig argued in a very interesting recent article in TESOL Quarterly on the ethics of working with English as additional language students, that we need to be aware that EAL students may defy. Folks, can I ask you all please to mute your microphones if you're not the speaker? Thanks so much. On an ethical basis, we need to be aware that ESL, EAL students may not fit into the categories we may be used to, such as international. And as graduate education becomes increasingly globalized, we need to be thinking about language for all graduate writers. And we focus on writing because that is one thing that all graduate writing programs have in common. Although oral skills are certainly very important, often vitally so, it is the written product that is academia's gatekeeper, and in terms of publication, the currency of our world. To quote again from the Tardy and Wittig article, as teachers, we need to be aware and raise awareness that there are challenging material and discursive structures that disadvantage English as additional language writers. And I'd add that for our graduate students in particular, these structures have very real impacts, not just on their grades and on their degree, but on retention, on completion, and future job prospects. So with all that in mind, we are going to talk today about 6 questions, which I hope you can see on your screen now. And mostly I'm going to ask Michelle these questions, and then we would invite you please to contribute again by typing comments in that little white chat box, which should be on the right of your screen, or by unmuting yourself and joining in by audio. For those of you watching this on the recording, please do continue these conversations on the Second Language Writing and Consortium of Graduate Communication discussion listservs, where we'd love to continue talking about these topics. So let's maybe just start by setting some groundwork for the kind of activities that Michelle and I are engaged in. So Michelle, what are you doing at Cornell for ESL graduate writing support?
Well, we're doing lots of different kinds of things. Cornell hired me about 4 years ago to create a graduate writing and speaking support program. And I think, is the link on the screen now? Yes, and so you can see the link. You won't be able to click on it, but you can go to my program's website and kind of poke around and see the kinds of things that we do. What we've developed so far is a set of courses. So we have 5 different writing courses and 3 different speaking courses. These are all 7-week credit-bearing courses that are all pass-fail and enrolled by students from across the disciplines, across different kinds of degree programs, all matriculated students. We also offer a peer tutoring program. We hire graduate students and train them in giving feedback to multilingual international graduate writers across the curriculum. We have a workshop series that focuses on different aspects of writing and speaking. We also piloted a graduate writing group program, but we've discontinued it because it's very labor intensive and I was doing just about all the work, and we found that it actually wasn't a great fit for the international students. So in place of that, I developed a course where dissertation and thesis writers can form writing groups and hopefully continue meeting after the course ends. There are some other units on campus that offer graduate writing support. One of the deans in the graduate school offers boot camps, and she'll focus them on different kinds of writing each time she runs them. And she also provides some funding to the undergraduate writing program to offer some peer tutoring to graduate students. But both of those programs are not specific to multilingual students, but the multilingual students can definitely attend them.
And I put a link to Michelle's website on the chat screen as well, and I'll put one up to my unit right now. I work in a very different environment from Michelle. I'm at the English Language Institute, which is the intensive English program at the University of Delaware. And for those outside the country, we're on the east coast of the United States, just south of Philadelphia. We're a very small state, but a very large English Language Institute. We are a pre-matriculation program, so the graduate students that we work with have not been directly admitted into their graduate programs because of their language proficiency, and so they take classes with us until they're deemed to be quote-unquote ready or proficient, or however you want to phrase it, to begin their degrees. The vast majority of the students who come to us are master's level students. We get a handful of doctoral students each year, and we teach them in a fairly traditional reading, writing, listening, speaking model, although we do have some courses that are specifically for MBA students. We did pilot a program earlier this year to offer short 4-week modules, somewhat based on the workshop series that Michelle does, and also models of short-term programs that have been developed extensively at the University of Toronto. And those were very popular, very successful, but we're waiting to hear if we can get funding to continue that pilot, and I can talk about reasons for that later if anyone's interested. So we represent somewhat different approaches to the task of graduate writing support, and hopefully that will give us some different perspectives that we can share today. And again, if you have any questions about anything we're saying, do go ahead and jump in there on the chat box, or feel free to interrupt as we're talking. Let's move on though now to the question of what do ESL graduate writers need? Michelle.
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting question, and I think we're still trying to figure this out, right, in our individual programs and across the different programs that offer this kind of support. But in my program, we developed a framework for thinking about this. And in our framework, we identified 5 different components: knowledge, strategies, feedback, practice, and a support structure. And I'll talk about each of those really briefly. So we're thinking about knowledge. We're thinking about knowledge about the writing process, understanding the connections between writing and the rhetorical situation, understanding how second language acquisition impacts writing. You know, graduate students are high-level thinkers, and they really want to understand kind of why, the theory and the evidence-based knowledge behind the kinds of things that we offer and the things that we're telling them. For strategies, we're thinking about strategies for kind of general writing, so writing process strategies, strategies for thinking about audience, but also strategies for investigating writing in their field, so strategies for analyzing genre, analyzing discourse, analyzing even writing processes. For feedback, we're thinking about feedback to writing in progress to understand what they're doing well and what they should focus their attention on as they revise and edit and continue to learn about writing. And we really feel this feedback should include feedback on content, if the person can give that kind of feedback, genre, rhetorical effectiveness, organization, style, discourse, and language. For practice, we're thinking about practicing writing in both high stakes and low stakes situations. So we all are very familiar with the high stakes circumstances that graduate students write in as they try to, they write applications for different kinds of things, grant proposals, dissertation proposals, articles for publication. And that's really important that we teach them how to, or they get practice in writing in those situations, because it's high stakes. They'll be really motivated to work quite a bit on different aspects of their writing. But low stakes writing is also really important. So using writing as a way of thinking, using writing as a mode for learning, and also having space for writing where you can take risks, which is so important for learning. And in terms of support structure, we're thinking about ongoing support that students can make use of for different purposes and at different points in their graduate degree programs. And so thinking about offering time-intensive kinds of support like courses, as well as support that students can kind of choose when they need it at that time, like a tutoring program. In terms of support structure, we're also thinking about getting support from a writing community. We think it's so important for international graduate students across different programs to meet each other and provide each other with support.
Yeah, I'd just add to that. I think those are all really important goals. You know, I approach this as from the ESL sort of applied linguistics, educational linguistics side. So I think that in addition to all of that, what I see, especially with my students, whose language is still developing and academic language skills are developing, is a real need for access to both the genres and the language resources of the students' disciplines. So thinking in terms of what students are going to be writing and the kinds of language they're going to need, both the sort of general academic grammar and vocabulary, which we see across all disciplines, but also very specifically the way language works in individual disciplines. And as Michelle mentioned there, the importance of different opportunities to write in low and high stakes. Also the importance of remembering that some genres that are, as Chris Feek and John Swales have said, occluded genres are also really important to teach explicitly. So things like writing proposals, how to write emails effectively to faculty and to peers, peer review. These are all genres that have to be taught in addition to the research paper, the dissertation, the kind of public genres, which are certainly important, but not the only ways in which graduate students write. And all of those have genre conventions and language features that have to be attended to as well. Does anyone else want to jump in on this question of what graduate ESL graduate writers need? I just want to pause for a moment to see if anyone has anything they want to add to that.
I think one thing I might add while we're waiting to see if somebody pops up in the chat box or on the mic is they also need to be able to figure out how to make best use of resources on campus and in their own departments. And so this might apply more to matriculated students. But what kinds of things can they expect their advisors to help them with? You know, we even do a lot of work to connect students to library resources. So we even help students set up meetings with the subject librarians to figure out resources that are available to help them with writing in their disciplines.
Yes, and that's something we certainly do in our pre-matriculation context as well. You know, there's an assumption, I think we're going to talk about this a bit later as well, but I think that there's an assumption in graduate degrees that everyone did, certainly in the United States, everyone did an American undergraduate degree. And our students coming from other cultures and countries may not have been exposed to library databases. In fact, I have students who don't know how to type in, you know, a word processor, even at the graduate level, not so many, more at the undergraduate level. So there's sort of that physical mechanics of writing. Karen has added in the chat box about not just giving them tools to analyze language and learn it themselves. I completely second that. I think there is a bit of a myth in the pre-matriculation intensive program EAP world where I work, where the idea is that we are going to magically, quote unquote, give them the language that they need, which is clearly not true. We talk about students having a course, which I dislike immensely. The real goal of our courses should be to make students independent writers and also independent language learners. And knowing where they can go, not just physically sort of on campus in terms of writing centers and how to work with feedback, but knowing where to go to get information, using learner dictionaries, using online corpora effectively. Karen mentioned using AntConc to build a corpus of texts. I think that's a great idea. Or using something like COCA, the Corpus of Contemporary American English, or an equivalent in your own variety of English, so that learners can investigate real uses of language. I think is just critical. As I'm sure all of you know on this list, whenever you've got 10 students from 10 different fields, they have 10 very different needs for writing. I see Jennifer has added a comment about how to get feedback and understand the feedback. And this goes to the point about sort of the social practices of graduate school, right? And Eric has mentioned the importance of linking with reading and having students build their own vocabulary lists. Again, having students be independent learners and autonomous learners of language, language as it is used in their own fields, of course, as well. And your point about linking reading and writing, Eric, is well taken. I don't know if you or someone else wants to jump in on that point.
Yeah, we talk a lot about helping students learn how to read as a writer. Reading not just for content, but reading to think about the kinds of decisions the writer made as they were writing. And to go back to the point about helping students understand feedback and get feedback, we think that's really important too. One thing that we've done is we've created a lot of handouts for students, and we make them available through a program-wide Blackboard site. And anybody can join this. And one of the handouts is questions that they can ask reviewers to get feedback on their drafts. And and just to kind of help them facilitate that conversation. Because if they, I mean, of course we know this, but if they send a draft to a supervisor and just say, is it good? They could get all kinds of responses. But if they can help guide the reviewer to focus on particular aspects of their writing and understand where the writer is in the writing process, that feedback will be so much more useful.
Yeah, Kathleen has commented on in the chat box something that I think ties into what you're just saying there, Michelle, that there is an issue of developing academic identity and confidence to express ideas. I think the challenge, of course, working with ESL writers is it's so tempting to go immediately to language. And, you know, I'm a language person. I think we should always be talking about language, but not only talking about language, or at least talking about language in ways that are part of their broader development. And I wonder if that has something to do with this idea of what it means to have an academic identity, and a sense of what is an appropriate degree of authority to express. And this comes down to the work that people like Ken Highland and others have done on expressing stance. You know, how confident should you be in your ideas as a first semester graduate student, as someone writing a dissertation proposal, as a dissertator, someone presenting their dissertation, or let's not forget postdocs, who are very, very large. International postdocs are a huge proportion of the population here in the US, and I wonder if that's true in other places as well. Whether ESL graduate units provide support to postdocs is always a bit of a controversial issue. It's one we're dealing with in our unit right now. Any other comments on that? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's something that we're dealing with too. And I like this point about academic identities. It's not only developing confidence in yourself as a scholar, but also feeling like you own English, and that as an English user, you can control the impressions that you make on the page. And so one thing that we do a couple of things around this. We talk about things like written accent and what does it look like, and when is it fine and useful to express accent on the page, and when it's not, and kind of controlling that. And then we also talk a lot about how writers create certain impressions about their own persona on the page, and we look at the different language moves that writers do to express their persona. And part of it is the stance-taking language. And so I think in almost all of our courses, we talk about stance-taking language, which is really useful.
Yeah, and it sort of comes back to this idea of when we look at language, not looking at language as error, which is a deficit approach. And again, I think that programs like mine have a habit of falling into that, because we talk about this binary of students being ready or not ready, which is, I think, very problematic. But looking at language as resource, and what resources, and there's nothing presupposed here that a so-called native speaker or monolingual has access to these resources. It varies enormously depending on an individual student's background and prior education. Eric has just typed a comment which I want to take a look at before we move on. It's about going back to the question of reading. Bring in an article and just read the first sentences to work on outlining. And sort of apply that. Yeah, it comes back to what Michelle just said about reading as a writer. So we all read as readers to get information, but then to go back and reread texts and look at how the text is operating rhetorically, structurally, linguistically, that kind of noticing is really valuable. And it's fascinating as well when you have students in different fields, because they get to see that it's not universal, that, you know, not everyone writes in the same way, that some of these so-called rules that we give about things like, you know, I see people talking about topic sentences and thesis statements and this sort of thing. It's not universal. It varies enormously. That variation is vital.
Yeah, and I think it's important too to think about even how academics read, and to talk about that with students, right? And so I'm teaching a course right now called Writing with Sources, and the course starts by helping students figure out strategies for even finding effective and credible sources for their research, and then reading and note-taking. And so we're talking about reading strategies right now. and I'm trying to convince them that it's okay. Like, I'm giving them strategies for skimming and dipping. So how do you look over a piece to figure out if it has information that you can use, and figure out where you need to read more closely, so where you need to dip. And then later in the course, I'm going to tie all of that into how we write and how we organize our writing. So if we assume that our readers are skimming and dipping, how do we put cues into our text to guide students, guide readers in figuring out where, pertinent information is. So making those kinds of connections also, we're finding is really useful for students.
I love that, skimming and dipping. That's great. I might have to take that one. That's really great. Jennifer's added about getting experts in the field, professors, and I would add actually even senior graduate students further advanced in their work, perhaps, to sort of think aloud. So is what you mean by that sort of saying, here's an article, tell me how you would approach this. How would you read this text? Is that what you mean, Jennifer?
Yeah, in my own field, I never actually read from the beginning to the end. First, I look at stats to see if it's even worth reading the article. If the stats are bad, then I don't really am going to bother reading it because I won't believe what they say. And a lot of fields, you just look at the graphs and that kind of stuff before you read other things. And a lot of students don't know that that's the way the professors are reading.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think yes, thank you for that contribution. I think it's vital, and it's vital as well, I think, for writers to understand that the different things they write are going to be read in different ways, that we don't always read and write for the same purpose. And I think that sort of tendency to universalize a certain approach to writing is where a lot of writers go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go on to the next question. So this is the blue sky question, which I thought would be fun to ask, if only because I find that whenever we're talking, we're always complaining about the lack of resources, right, Michelle? So if resources were unlimited, and if they are where you work, don't tell us because we'll be jealous. But if resources were unlimited, what support services would you like to provide? The blue sky question. Go for it.
So it may surprise people to find out that at Cornell University, resources are not, unlimited. In fact, I really feel like we're on a shoestring budget in my program. And so we have 3 faculty in my program. We're all non-tenure track lecturers, and but just 3 to serve like the 3,000 plus international graduate students at Cornell. And all of our programs are voluntary, so students can choose to be in them. We don't use assessment to select students that most need our services or something like this, because we really believe that all international graduate students, and in fact all graduate students, need support. And that should be seen as normal. So anyways, what would we offer if we had more resources? We'd offer a far more robust peer tutoring program. So right now we're offering about 32 hours a week of peer tutoring in writing and presenting, and about we're going up to about 12 hours a week for pronunciation tutoring. And both of these services are booked solid way ahead of time. And if there's an unused hour for tutoring, it's because somebody canceled their appointment and somebody from the wait list didn't have time to jump in. So I would offer far more hours for peer tutoring. I would want to offer far more courses. We moved from 15-week courses to 7-week courses in part to offer more varied topics for our courses, since we're just limited to the 3 faculty. But I'd love to offer more. Right now, all of our courses have to be designed for all students. So it doesn't matter if a student's a first semester master's student or a 7th year PhD student, they'd be in the same course. So I'd love to be able to offer particular courses, focus on particular kinds of writing and students in particular fields. University of Toronto is able to do that more. They're able to hire a broader variety of instructors, and boy, I would love that. And because all of our faculty are on 9-month contracts, we can't offer anything really during any of the breaks. We do offer a summer English immersion program just for Masters of Engineering matriculated students who are going to start their program in the fall, and that's because the College of Engineering supports that program. I'd also love to be able to offer some online programming. We've experimented a little bit with online tutoring, but we actually don't have the equipment, which sounds crazy, but I'm still arguing that our tutoring stations need computers, and then the only computers that I've been able to argue for are thin clients, meaning they're not full computers. They just connect to the cloud. And according to our IT guy, he's still investigating it. You can't plug in a camera or a microphone, and so we can't offer online tutoring even with the computers. So online programming would be really important for students who are in the field or otherwise away from campus. And then I'd love to be able to offer our programs to a wider variety of students. We're restricted to international multilingual students. A lot of domestic students ask to use our programs and we can't let them in. We can only offer our programs to full-time matriculated students, so students that are part-time or visiting or exchange students can't use our programs. We can't offer our programs to visiting scholars or to postdocs, but boy, would I love to. So I'd like to be able to really open up the program much more widely. How about you, Nigel?
Yeah, I'll give my quick wish list, and there's some great ideas coming up in the chat box I want to talk about as well. But right now, honestly, I'd like to do anything. Right now, we don't offer any university-wide support for graduate students beyond the Writing Center, although there is now a separate graduate writing center. It's actually just a satellite room in the library, staffed by, I think, staffed by graduate students rather than undergraduate students, and that's not connected to us, and it doesn't have anyone who has specific ESL expertise. That's not a criticism of what they're doing, but I would like to see expertise in there. I would like to do facilitated graduate writing groups. I did graduate writing groups when I was at the University of North Carolina. They continue there. But as Michelle said earlier, the problem is I think they really do need a trained facilitator, and one person can't run writing groups for the entire campus. I very much like that writing group model, almost more than individual tutoring, or at least as a complementary project to writing tutoring, because I think that it allows you to do peer and near peer work as well, where graduate students either from the same or different fields are reading each other's work, and then again learning that feedback and peer review process, especially for doctoral students, but not only. I would like to see us offer a pre-sessional program where matriculated graduate students could come in and take a 4 to 6 week program with us, even if they have met the English language proficiency requirements on something like the TOEFL test. We don't need to go into it here, but I imagine there are people snickering around the world listening to this who maybe don't completely trust that a TOEFL score is indicative of the writing skills needed for graduate study. It's not designed to test them, so it really doesn't. I'd like to see those students be able to do something before their programs start. And I say before because I think it's part of the acculturation process of learning to live in a new country, getting used to the new conventions, but also because the vast majority of international students now are master's level, and master's programs are often very rigid. They have fixed course sequences, and there just isn't space in them for additional courses. This is what we're told. I want to pick up on a couple of comments that have come up on the chat, and there's some great stuff here, and this is recorded, so you can go back and look at it, about whether, quote unquote, we should be doing this, or should this be work done by departments. I have a couple of thoughts on this, and Michelle, I'd love you to jump in on this. We did a survey a few years ago, which we published in the book Supporting Graduate Writers, which we'll shamelessly plug throughout this, where we found that the we of graduate communication is highly fragmented. And if you just look through the list of attendees today, some of us are in intensive English programs, some of you are in writing centers, some of you are in writing programs, some of you may be in graduate schools, in English departments, and if learning centers, libraries. I'd love to hear if there's anything I've missed, because the diversity of places where this kind of support is offered is pretty spectacular. The reason for centralizing rather than leaving it to departments is that you end up with very, very patchy support, where students in neurobiology are getting excellent support from their faculty, and just down the corridor, students in biochemistry are getting absolutely nothing. And what we've found is leaving it up to the departments creates a very unequal unequal programming and unequal access. But that said, I think I will add to my wish list here the ability to work with departments more to understand what their students need and tailor services to their own students, rather than trying to present stuff that will be useful for everyone. Because for reasons we said earlier, that may or may not be possible. So your point about working with the departments, I think, is very, very well taken, and I think is vital. Someone commented earlier about the importance of having a graduate writing specialist in the writing center. And I would add making sure there is ESL writing specialists, because all of these are they're subspecialties which may or may not speak to each other. And I think it's really important that we do speak to each other. There's a comment about looking at WAC and WID. I know that's an area Michelle has worked in, and I think we both feel that WAC and WID is one possible model for graduate writing support, right, Michelle?
Yeah, I don't know if it, well, it depends on how you define WAC and WID. I mean, WID is investigating writing within specific disciplines and understanding how that writing varies, you know, quite a lot. And WAC often refers to either curricular requirements for students, where they, you know, undergraduates have to take a certain number of writing intensive courses. I don't think that's a model that would work for at the graduate level at all. But it also refers to faculty development, so supporting faculty to be better mentors to their own student writers. And I think that is really important, and that's something we're just starting to work on in my program.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a couple of comments on the chat to the same effect, and I think so. Karen just asked, would it be useful to give workshops on? I've lost where the comment was on working. Training faculty to work with graduate writers and with graduate ESL writers, and I think clearly the answer to that is yes, if that's not something they are comfortable with doing. There's a question up here about whether we should be talking about all ESL graduate students or should we be breaking it down into different groups. Absolutely, we should be talking about different groups. I firmly believe that. One of the problems with a lot of the discussion in graduate writing support, and we found this even just on a conversation that Michelle and I were in earlier today, is it has a habit, of turning into a discussion of doctoral writing support. And the PhD is not the only graduate degree, and it's not the biggest graduate degree. There are more master's students. Master's programs are growing faster, and there is a greater proportion of international students in master's programs. And master's students need different kinds of writing. And then again, academic master's programs versus professional master's programs have very different needs. So if you compare an MBA or an MPA, Master of Public Administration degree, to say an MA in linguistics or an MA in French studies, or in even compared to say a professional science master's degree, such as the ones we offer at the University of Delaware, they absolutely have different needs. You know, it's not always all about publication, and it's not always all about the dissertation. Not every program ends in one. So I think that is a really vital thing, and making sure that master's students aren't forgotten. Bluntly, master's programs are seen as revenue generators for many universities in the United States, which is fine, except there is, I think, also an ethical responsibility to provide the communication support that students will need. Eric asked a point, there's a question about, do departments see the value of what we're doing? I want to just hold that question, because I think we're going to come back to it, because I think it's a vital question to talk about how we get departments and administrators to see the value of providing this kind of support. Let's go on. Whoops, go forward to the next question. Well, that is my next question. That was a fabulous segue. I wish I'd known it was coming. How do you make the argument to university administration to advocate for ESL writing support? And maybe not just university administration, but even departmental administration. Diplomacy, yes, lots of diplomacy is needed. Michelle, how have you gone about it?
Well, here actually I've taken a lot of lessons from writing across the curriculum. So I used to be a writing across the curriculum program director, and I started that program. And it taught me a lot about how you make persuasive arguments to administrators. And one thing that I can say is that it's really important to do a lot of assessment. And when you're doing assessment, think not only what does your program need to be able to do what they're doing better, like what kinds of information do you need, right? So it's not just formative assessment for your own purposes, but what kinds of information do administrators care about? And so with all of my programs, I keep a lot of different kinds of data. And then I write an annual report, and nobody asks me for an annual report, but I always write one. And I do that so I can kind of make sure administrators know what their money is going towards, and so that they can really know what's happening in my program. So I think that's really important. And then I send that annual report to different people. I send it to the graduate school, which is who I report to in terms of budgetary things. I send it to the Knight Institute for Writing and the Disciplines, which is who I report to for our actual lecturer positions. But then I also send it to people like the Vice Provost for International Affairs, she's new in her position, and one of her agenda items is to support international students. And so I'm trying to help her figure out what that means and trying to educate her on what's happening. And then another kind of thing that you can do, and this is a point that Jane Freeman had made, I think at the last CGC, is to really keep track of unmet need or unmet demand. And there's different ways to do that. One thing that I do is for our peer tutoring program is I'm able to create an option for a student to go on a wait list for an appointment. We use MyWC Online that has that option. And then I keep track of all those numbers so that I can share that, with administrators to show unmet need. I can't do that for our courses. I wish I could, because I know there's unmet need there. But then I also, one thing I've been doing lately is keeping track of two different kinds of things. One is all the requests that I get from different groups for support I can't actually offer them. That's one type of unmet need. And then I'm also then kind of looking across the university and seeing which departments are creating which kinds of ESL support for their own students. And it's really interesting. So I found that one department is actually referring their students to Cayuga Medical Center for accent reduction therapy. Oh my God, isn't that terrible, right? Completely against the philosophy of the kinds of things that we're doing in our program. And I put together a list of all the different kinds of kind of homegrown ESL support that we're seeing in the departments, and I sent that to the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs. So I'm trying to build this case for a language center that supports more students and has kind of more comprehensive support. And it's been persuasive. She's taking a lot of the information I'm putting together and taking it right to the President's Council. So that can be persuasive. How about you, Nigel?
Yeah, the point that I started making about this is that one thing a couple of things. The first is read your university mission statement or whatever the strategic plan is. I can see that somebody has commented from George Washington University, something like your first name there, it's either Megan or Natalia, I guess, has commented on the importance of reading your mission statement. Hi, Megan. It's importance of reading your university mission statement or your graduate school mission statement or whatever strategic plan your provost last published, or in the case of my university, the speech that your new president just gave, because we have a new university president. And you sort of want to mold whatever you're saying around what the university's current priorities are. And to add to that, the vital importance of picking your time and picking your battles. Sometimes you can make the same argument 6 times and it suddenly gets heard and you wonder, well, why now? And it's because something is just in the air. At my university, we are moving towards creating a graduate college, which we haven't had before. And this has been the perfect opportunity to start these conversations. And we've actually managed to get the idea of communication support written into the plans for this new college. We'll see what that turns into, but I think that's important. Megan also mentioned the importance of needs analysis and making it clear that we are not just providing support, but that we are serious academics and professionals ourselves. And making it clear that we have a discipline. You know, graduate communication, I don't think is a discipline yet. I think we've had lots of conversations within the consortium as to whether we are. But if you are coming at this out of writing studies or rhetoric or out of applied linguistics, ESL, English as academic purpose for academic purposes, we know things about disciplinary language. We know things about language acquisition. We know things about rhetoric, composition, genre studies, and making it clear that we are academics too, even if we're non-tenure track, and I am as well. I think that's important. So needs analysis is important. Collecting data, as Michelle said, is important. Universities run on data. And showing that we are collaborators and fellow academics, fellow professionals, and not just in this sort of support world, which is often treated as being of lower status. Other things people are suggesting are focusing on things that universities care about. So appealing to self-interest, so retention, time to completion. For master's students, Karen mentioned job placement and the importance of communication in job skills. And again, not to plug the book, but in supporting graduate writers, Steve Simpson, the lead editor on the book, has some very nice chapters in the introduction and conclusion, pointing to employer surveys and organizations like the National Science Foundation, who are emphasizing the importance of communication skills. Time to degree has been mentioned, admissions information, student satisfaction surveys, especially with international students. We know that students apply because of word of mouth. And so if students are not satisfied, that word gets back very quickly. Grant funding, grant writing, and providing grant writing services, that appeals to research intensive universities a lot. There's a question up here I'm just going to read. This is an interesting question, Michelle. How can we assess the kinds of things that admin are persuaded by? How do we evaluate and sort of share this kind of data?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so the kinds of data that I collect, I actually don't look at time to degree or retention, and there's reasons for that. One is if you look at the actual statistics, international graduate students tend to have better retention and better time to degree than domestic graduate students. For lots of reasons, I think. It has to do with the funding structure for international students, visa structure. They're just putting so many more resources. It's such a bigger sacrifice to go to another country and study, that they tend to have really good numbers in those areas. So those aren't as persuasive for international graduate students. But other kinds of numbers are, right? For my programs, I'm trying to show administrators that their money is being used well in my program. And so I take, lots of simple things like counts, how many students are using different services. For Writing Center, I created the scale for utilization rate of sessions, and that the sweet point is somewhere between 60 and 70% utilization rate, which means 60 to 70% of the time offered as tutoring is being used. Anything above that mean that students are getting dissatisfied because they can't find sessions when they want them. Anything below means your program's being underutilized. So I create numbers, a lot of numbers, and I explain why those numbers are important, and I back them up with some research. And satisfaction is actually really important. Somebody mentioned that. And so we have course evaluations, of course, but also evaluations of our tutoring program and our workshops. And universities care about satisfaction because universities want alumni to send money to their schools. And there's something called affinity. Like if a person feels more affinity and more satisfied by their universities, they're more likely, of course, to support that university once they leave as an alumni. So that's also something that administrators will care about.
Let's move on to the next question, which was raised a bit earlier, which is how can ESL and writing specialists work with graduate faculty and supervisors? Because clearly a lot of the, that is students' first point of contact, and we know from an extensive body of research that especially at the doctoral level, the relationship with the supervisor is one of the key factors in success or lack of success, lack of completion. Michelle?
Yeah, and this is something that I really care about. You know, as a former Writing Across the Curriculum program director, I had a lot of contact with faculty and helping them think about how to support their students as writers. It's harder to do that, I think, from a language support program like mine, because we're not positioned in a way that people kind of expect us to do this. It's not our charge, really. But I think it's really, really important. And it's interesting because I think this year, more than any, international graduate students have been asking me, what do you do to share these messages and this knowledge with our supervisors who really need this, who need to understand how second language acquisition connects to writing, need to understand more about the writing process. And so they're pushing me too to go more in this direction. And so at Cornell, we're just starting to explore this. I've tried to explore this earlier, and I kept finding that I was stepping on toes. So there's already like an Office for Teaching Excellence, and I'd approached them to see if I could collaborate with them to offer some faculty development. And they said, oh no, we have that covered. You know, we're all set. But then I found out that there's also a Vice Provost Office for Faculty Development. So I've been contacting that office. And then the Office for Teaching Excellence has been reorganized lately, and they have a new director. So I contacted that director, and we have a meeting set for a couple of weeks. And then I just posted on our website that we are open to doing faculty development for either individual faculty or for departments. The dean of the graduate school saw that, and she's now invited me to these meetings that she organizes in the spring for all directors of graduate studies. So I'm going to go and introduce this new service, I guess, support program. So this is the way that I've been trying to figure out. I think it's very actually political at different campuses. You have to figure out who's already doing this kind of support. Are they open to collaboration? If they're not, what else can you do, you know?
Yeah, this is a tricky one, right? There's some good comments coming up on the chat about the importance. I mean, a lot of it, what I'm hearing from all of you is how important it is to build relations with different people on campus and different constituencies on campus, because you'll know your own universities well, but universities, especially at the graduate level, can be quite fragmented and quite siloed. We do this, you do that, and so the more allies we have on campus, the better. Jane Freeman, who is on this, I see her name here, so I don't know if you're able to jump in, Jane, but Jane has spoken at CGC events about the importance of educating up, which I've always found to be an extremely helpful comment, that, without patronizing people, you can try to share the information further up the chain. Jane, if you click on the little microphone button, you should be able to switch on your mic and just jump in.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, just at every opportunity, helping faculty and deans and vice deans have a deeper understanding of what we do. Not in a didactic way, but there are lots of opportunities when they're raising another. I liked what was being talked about earlier about looking at the priorities of the university. If you know that there is, right now, there's a lot of emphasis at U of T on bringing in international students. And so just in conversation, yes, we're really well positioned to help with that with our course on this or that, to get people into conversations. We have, one of our challenges is that people who oversee us at the School of Graduate Studies rotate out. A dean is here for 3 years or 5 years, a vice dean is here for 5 years. So it's important to find ways to help faculty and the deans that oversee us understand the work, because they aren't in our field.
Yeah, and it comes back to that question of sharing disciplinary knowledge and making it clear that we have our own set of knowledge and tools to share, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were saying, Michelle, in annual reports, you know, helping them see that we're at conferences, like helping them to understand we are functioning in a discipline, and providing them the numbers, unmet need, demand for various things we do that help them to understand the many ways through which we are helping them to achieve their own goals. So that
Yes.
they're advocates with us.
Yeah, and Karen has made an interesting point, and I think it comes back to what you were just saying, Jane, about the deans and chairs often are in rotating positions, but the graduate coordinator, the staff level positions, may be more permanent. And it's certainly, if we're thinking about filtering information and getting through to students, those graduate coordinators and graduate admissions and people may be the people who are better placed to disseminate information and maybe even get the contacts with the faculty. One of the advantages of doing a needs analysis, an online needs analysis, is it makes your program visible. And it's the first thing I do when we're creating anything, is to do a needs analysis, partly because I'm interested in the data, but simply completing the needs analysis makes people aware of who you are and can often lead to very productive conversations. Let's move on to our last question, since we are approaching the top of the hour. And sort of not just think about what support is available for our colleagues, but what support is available for us as graduate communication specialists, since this is a relatively nascent field and one where people we found through our conversations can often feel isolated as being the only person doing it. And I'm going to make a very quick plug here for the Consortium on Graduate Communication, which has now been around for about 3 or 4 years. And you can see our website there. We have a very active listserv. We have resources and bibliographies, lists of useful books and articles. We have course syllabi and needs analysis tools on the website. We have a directory of members for those people who join. And our next event will be our Summer Institute in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan, one of the sort of homes of graduate communication, of course, with the theme Emerging Identities in Graduate Communication Support in June. And information has just been released on the website, and there'll be a call for proposals going out soon. So join the listserv if you're interested. And the purpose of CGC was because we were forever going to conferences and finding that there was one session on graduate writing, and there maybe would be a dozen of us would show up, and we'd find we were sort of tracking each other through the conferences, and it was often hard to get enough sessions on these topics onto programs, and this was a way for us to be somewhat less isolated. Michelle has some thoughts on that as well, I know.
Sure. That said, we do tend to go to lots of different kinds of conferences. And so, Nigel, when we did the survey 3 or 4 years ago of people who give to graduate writing support, was it like something like 56 different conferences people were going to? It
was something like that. There was no one dominant conference.
Right, right. And so I think it's also important to foster graduate writing support communities at these different conferences, because not everybody will be able to add another conference to their list, like the Consortium on Graduate Communication Summer Institute. And so, you know, there's growing communities of people that focus on graduate writing at TESOL, at 4Cs, at the International Writing Across the Curriculum Conference, which is coming up this June. Writing Center conferences, which has both an international conference and local conferences, different kinds of applied linguistics conferences. And one thing that we found really helpful is that any CGC member can host a CGC event at one of these conferences. So at some conferences, we've asked the chair if we can just simply have a room during one of the breakout sessions to hold just like roundtables and talk about graduate writing support. Or organize some kind of like, you know, coffee session or drinks or something like this. And so fostering these communities wherever we go can be very useful.
That brings us almost to the hour. If there's any other questions, please go ahead and either jump in by audio or type them into the box. While you're doing that, I want to thank everyone who participated today. My thanks to Michelle Kim at TESOL headquarters for facilitating this, and to the Second Language Writing Interest section for sponsoring this. Please keep in touch. I realize we forgot to put our email addresses on here, but you can find us through the Second Language Writing Interest section or through CGC, and these are conversations that I hope will keep going. Michelle has put her email up there. I guess I will do the same as well. You can find me at the University of Delaware. Any last questions before we sign off? All right, well, we'll say thank you all very much. Thank you very much, Michelle, for joining me today and taking part in this webinar.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This has been fun. This
was great. Thanks all for your contributions. That was a really interesting presentation, and we'll wish you all a very happy continuation of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.